double digits. Welcome to Training Insights, episode 10. Welcome to episode 10 of Training Insights. This podcast brought to you by Training Magazine, trainingmag.com, and my name is Kevin McGowan. Today we're going off to Omaha, Nebraska, or near Omaha. We're going to talk to Cy Wakeman. She has been in the biz for quite a while. She is the president of Reality-Based Leadership, and she's a well-known author and speaker. She has a new book coming out called No Ego, and it's all about how to get rid of drama in the workplace and how to really focus yourself on your career, your team, and be successful in the workspace. So I got on the phone with Cy. Really great conversation. I hope you like it. Here we go. Here's Cy Wakeman near Omaha, Nebraska.
All right, Cy Wakeman, welcome to Training Insights.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And you are in, let me get this straight again, it's Elkhorn, Nebraska.
Elkhorn, Nebraska. It's a suburb of Omaha, Nebraska.
And how's the weather down there today?
Hot and beautiful, sunny
and
gorgeous. Yep.
Excellent. I know we finally got heat here in Ottawa, so I'm pretty happy about that. Summer comes late and leaves early here.
Yeah, enjoy your 3 days of summer.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you're the president of Reality-Based Leadership. You've written a few books in the past. You have a new one coming out in September called No Ego. So I have a whole bunch of things I want to ask you, but I'm wondering if first you can tell me a little bit about reality-based leadership. What does that mean to you?
Reality-based leadership is where we teach people, rather than wishing that their reality were different, that they had a different boss or more money or more staff or better technology, all the things that we tend to use as excuses. We actually teach leaders and employees how to live skillfully in their current reality, so that in the moment they can be very successful, very engaged, very happy, in spite of whatever circumstances they find themselves in. So we really focus on growing people to be very capable rather than trying to find the perfect organization or the perfect structure. While those things are important, we don't think that they're the deal breakers.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I always, you would hear people talk about how, you can fit into any situation, or the opposite. If there is a bad situation, you should just leave, but not necessarily is what you're saying, because it could be a bad environment maybe, but it could be your own ego causing your problems. Is that right?
Yes, so I would say, your ego is almost always the source of your problems or your drama or your suffering. Because even if you're in a situation where you don't prefer it, we still say either stay in joy or go in peace. But don't go and blame, and don't go and, with lack of accountability. And don't stay in hate. A lot of people stay and then complain. And so, when organizations say that people leave their leaders, we would say people make a choice to leave and then blame their leaders. And it's just a more of a accountable attitude towards your own life.
Well, what do you think causes people to stick around and complain? If they're not happy in a work situation, why do they get stuck in that?
I think a lot of it comes from believing what we think. And let me explain. So our ego is always narrating our life, and it usually narrates us as the victim and everybody else is the villain. And so it filters the reality that we see. It really corrupts the data that we make decisions on. And so when people believe that they're at the victim of their circumstances, they really believe that if they went anyplace else, there would be those circumstances as well. So they aren't very free because they don't realize that, there's two ways to go through today, joy or misery, that suffering is optional, that their success and happiness has a lot more to do with themselves and their own choices, not their situation. So when people start attributing their happiness to their situation, they become very dependent. And so they get into a habit where they stay in blame. They are not in a state of high accountability, and it becomes habitual where every day the experience is that they're dependent on their circumstances, on their boss, and that they aren't very empowered So when people talk to me about being empowered, I just say step into the power you already have. I don't need to give you more power. You already have a ton of power. You just need to step into it.
And interesting, you brought up the issue of accountability, and it's a major theme in this new book you've written, No Ego. What is the difference between an accountable employee and one who's not necessarily accountable, in your view?
A lot of it is mindset. Accountable people believe that things happen because of them, not in spite of them. And while we can't control the world, we certainly have a profound amount of influence in the choices that we make. And, as we move through the world, we're always co-creating. So how I see a situation affects how I act and then affects the results I get. And so we are always affecting our outcomes, even just by observing. There's a scientific principle that says, it's called the observer effect, that just by observing, that observation affects the experiment being held. And so just by being in life, we're affecting it. And when you learn through accountability to step up, you really realize how much effect you have on your own outcomes. And so high accountables are people that have discovered that.
Interesting, because so I'm trying to envision the impact on yourself would be very dramatic if you kind of realize I'm accountable for my own actions and I am going to be more in charge of my career, of my job. But what's the impact on the organization? How does an organization help people to get there if they're not necessarily? Or is it up to the organization?
I think it's up to both. Great leaders call people to greatness, and the best way to get accountable. So accountability is kind of death to the ego. We all have this ego, as I said, filtering our world and narrating it, and it corrupts our data. So the ego sees insults where there isn't any, and it needs to stay kind of angry to stay alive. So it's always kind of turning things that we see and adding a story to it. Accountable people have a more pure relationship with reality. They just kind of see reality as it is. They don't blame themselves, but they have a healthy sense of guilt and a healthy sense of pride. So one, when you're accountable as an individual, you're a happier person, because we know that accountability and happiness are highly correlated. For the organization, there's far less drama, what we would call emotional waste. And in fact, the basis of the book was some of my research that I found that the average person spends 2 hours and 26 minutes per day in drama, waste, emotional waste.
That sounds really low compared to some people.
Yeah, exactly. It's an average. But that adds up per person to 816 hours a year. Right. 816 hours a year per person. That is not energy going into results or happiness. And when I found that out, then I went on to find out that one of the main sources of lack of accountability one of the main sources of drama is lack of accountability or ego. They make up almost 50% of the drama sources. And so if you can help people learn to be accountable and you can help people learn to bypass their ego, you've taken care of about almost 50% of the drama in your workplace. So just the ability to recapture per person 400 hours a year is significant to the organization. It can be millions and millions of dollars.
As I'm reading your book, I'm getting a sense that there's not a lot of BS that you're willing to take. Is that about right?
I would say that's
excuses?
True. Because, yeah, and the reason being is that most excuses we've made up is us listening to our ego again, because I believe the universe has your back, things happen in your favor, and that excuses are our way of justifying why we didn't step up and why we stepped down instead.
That's very true. I hadn't thought of it quite like that. You phrased that so well. There's one part in the book that struck me, and there's these 3 steps that you're talking about when you were kind of given the marching orders by HR to get some particular numbers in terms of employee engagement. And you had 3 strategies that you outlined. One was to grow accountability of people who are willing. 2 was to reward and support high accountability people. And 3, transition folks who were not accountable off your team?
Absolutely. So a lot of people will come to me and, they'll say, how do I get my team accountable? And you can't really make somebody accountable, but you can invite them up. Are you willing, and what's your commitment level? Because accountability in our model starts with commitment and willingness. And so, basically the way I see it, if I have low engagement issues on my team, if I work on engagement, the problem I run into is that engagement without accountability creates entitlement. So right now in HR learning and development, we're really focusing on how we can engage others, which really ends up being how can we bend reality, how can we fix people's circumstances? And the answer is we can't in the short term. But if you back away from all this work on engagement, accountability is directly related to happiness, and which is engagement. And so when I was asked to engage my people, I knew that I couldn't buy their love. I knew that to focus just on making perfect circumstances would actually create entitlement. And so the only choices I saw was, if I want them to be engaged, I can help raise their accountability through invitation. I can, get them off my team, or I can find the high accountables already there and engage those folks. Mm-hmm. And those are really the choices.
And how is that conversation?
Most people waste an enormous amount of energy trying to engage the unengageable. If you're a low accountable, you aren't engaged in your own life, and I'm trying to engage you at work. It's just I can't engage the unengageable. High accountables think engagement is a choice.
How is it in having this conversation with HR, for example, like in this scenario, you're writing about how 15% was unengaged and 85 were going thumbs up, everything was great, but HR was focusing on that 15 and how do we fix this? So how do you respond to that when they're looking at numbers and you're kind of like, well, okay, we're not talking about those numbers here. What numbers are you talking about? Yeah.
So HR actually came to me. I had these weird engagement results where 85% of my people were top box, on a scale of 1 to 5. 15% were really low and, kind of like hostily disengaged. We're talking like pipe bombs, kind of, I hate this place disengaged.
I've worked with those people,
Yeah. They came to me and they said, Cy, what are we going to do about this 15%? And my response was, don't touch them. My plan is working. And what I mean by that is I started out life as a therapist, and the same behavior can't please a high accountable and a low accountable at the same time. You will always have somebody disengaged and frustrated. Make sure they're the right people. Make sure you're taking off the right people, because now those folks had good information about what it would take to succeed on my team, and they were considering leaving, which was a great decision given what was required and what they were able to give. It was not a match. And so the fact that they were looking at leaving, I was perfectly fine with, because my high accountables, and we were producing great results, and it was some of the highest engagement levels they had seen. But when I looked at drama in the workplace, that was 2 hours and 26 minutes per person. And you look at over the past 6 years, we have spent more than ever in leadership development. Engagement has stayed completely flat, according to Gallup, overall for the last 5 years. And we know that drama has increased, not decreased, based on past studies. So you've got increasing drama, more leadership development than ever, and engagement flat. That tells us how we're approaching leadership and development isn't working. And so we have to look at, in HR, our core beliefs. And one of them is engagement. We've over-rotated on engagement, and we aren't focused enough on accountability. And I think you see that in organizations today, because almost everybody is asking for accountability training. But accountability isn't about the training. It's about changing the way you lead. Because when people are able to see reality and you don't buffer it for them, they get accountable. So the way you go beyond ego is you get people self-reflecting, and self-reflecting is the main development point in accountability. So we teach leaders in the book how to bypass ego and how to get people self-reflecting, how to increase their own accountability, and then that decreases the drama. It increases engagement, and it really changes the way we handle change.
Wow, Cy, I'm going to leave it there. We've hit kind of our time, but I'm going to absorb that, and maybe we'll have another call again when your next book's coming.
I would love that. It really is a different way of thinking, and when I speak to people, it's challenging conventional wisdom, so it does take them a while to absorb it, but I would just encourage people to connect with us on social media, and we're at Cy Wakeman, and there's a lot of content out there that helps explain these concepts.
Well, that's great. Cy, thank you so much, and best of luck with the book, No Ego, coming out on September 19th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cy. That was a really eye-opening conversation for me, and a really eye-opening book. It's going to come out September 19th, I believe, 2017. So go to your favorite local bookseller, search for Cy Wakeman, No Ego, and pick this one up. No one's paying me to say this. I read it. It was really an eye-opener for me. It really made me think about my career, how I've behaved, certainly in certain situations in my career, and how I've worked with others who may have had challenges in terms of, ego and how to manage relationships. So I highly, highly recommend the book. So once again, thank you, Cy. Really eye-opening. I'm very appreciative of our conversation, the time we spent together. And this is our last episode for the summer. So we're going to take a little break until the fall, but thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, anything you want to say, drop me a line. Go to kevinmcgowan.ca, and you can find me there. Thanks so much, folks. We'll see you in the fall.